Now, when you find yourself building long if-else-if statements, as we're doing it here with multiple else-if and a final else branch, there is an alternative structure, an alternative feature you could use in Go. Because instead of writing such a if-else-if statement, you could use the built-in switch statement. And the main idea behind such a switch statement is still that you can execute different pieces of code for different conditions. And it works like this. You type switch, and then after this switch keyword, you add the value which you want to evaluate. In my case here, the choice, because that's the value I'm comparing to a couple of other values. So you would write switch choice, and then you have opening and closing curly braces. This is then the switch statement body. In that body, you then define multiple cases with the case keyword. And here you now define the different values for which you want to check. For example, case 1. Then you add a colon, and then in a new line, the code that should be executed for that case. And you can also have multiple lines of code for a single case. For example here, for case 1, so that choice is equal to 1, I would execute this code here. And we can move on to the next case. In this case, that choice is equal to 2. And then it would be all this code here that should be executed. So I can copy that here into my case 2 block. And so on. The next step therefore is to specify case 3, so that choice is equal to 3, and it would then be this code here that should be executed if that's the case. So it's this code, which I'll paste below case 3. And then I'm always pressing the format document shortcut here in VS Code to make sure that the code is nicely formatted. And then of course we also have case 4, but in the if-else-if statement, we actually did not have else if choice equals 4, but just a else statement to basically cover all other values. So if the user entered something invalid or any number other than 1, 2, or 3, we would end up in this else block. And I'd like to get the same result now here for my switch statement. And this can be achieved by not specifying another case here, but instead by adding the default keyword. So by specifying the default case, which will become active if no other case becomes active. And then again, we can copy this code from the else branch and then paste that here into the default case. And with that, we can get rid of that if-else-if statement here and instead use that switch statement. I also now want to replace return here with continue, by the way. I didn't do that earlier, but of course here I also don't want to return, but instead continue if we are in one of these if blocks. Now, one important thing to note, which is the reason for why I'm getting a warning again down here, is that if you are using such a switch statement, the break keyword has a special meaning. It now no longer breaks out of the closest surrounding loop, but instead out of the switch statement, which actually isn't a feature you normally need, because the switch case statement in Go works such that only one case can become active anyways. In other languages, you need to add break at the end of each case to make sure that no other case gets triggered, and that's not needed when working with Go, but still the break keyword has this different meaning when used inside of a switch block. Therefore here, when using this switch statement, we actually can't use break to get out of the loop anymore. Instead, we have to use return to end the entire application, which is also fine though, here in this default case, and therefore move this line of code into the default case. So if you have some code If you have an application where you must be able to break out of some loop, this switch case statement is the wrong solution, and you instead should stick to the if-else-if statement you saw before. Otherwise, you can use this switch statement as an alternative to such a if-else-if statement.